Welcome. This tutorial covers MCP, that is Model Context Protocol, a standard for AI models to interact with external tools, data sources, and services in a structured and safe way. So now let's have a look at how it works. Let's consider this as our application. Our application will have MCP client, and these are the service providers. We expose them in MCP servers. So our MCP client interacts with these MCP servers using MCP protocol. So this is standardized protocol for AI service integration. Let's say user asks a question in the AI application. MCP client interprets that request and understands the intent. Client discovers available tools in the MCP servers. Client calls the appropriate tool via MCP protocol. MCP server executes the tool such as API call, DB query, or file access and gets the results. And result is returned to the client, shown to the AI and then to the user. Now let's look at an example how MCP differs from HTTP or tool calling. So this picture represents usual tool calling without MCP and here with MCP. Let's say we are using different LLM providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini. So we have these APIs, users API, orders API, files API. So for each of these LLMs, the code implementation will slightly differ. So when we are implementing the LLM calls for these APIs, we have to implement it in three different ways. So it will be a n-into-m dimension issue. In case of MCP server, our MCP client will interact with the MCP server. So it is generalized version. So if your MCP client uses, so if your application uses any LLM, it doesn't matter to it. As we are using MCP server and the MCP client, this MCP server will have only one implementation of each API. So here we avoid n into m dimensions. For each API, we have only one implementations. If these implementations like MCP server for file access, MCP server for database, and MCP server for API calls, if it is distributed among different teams, it will be easier to handle. Suppose the MCP database team implements a new tool, it will not disturb any other clients or any other server implementations here. Only the client which is interested in the new tool will make the changes in that code and invoke that tool. So here without MCP, it will be a point-to-point integration. There is no client server architecture here. So our app directly talks to the each of the service, and it will be harder to scale in case of if we have number of different LLM providers and different services which are managed by different teams, it will be very harder to implement. Now let's look at when to use MCP and when not. Let's say our application has a single tool calling or we are using only single LLM, then MCP is not required. MCP is required when we have multiple providers and multiple tools across multiple AI apps, and these tools owned by different teams. In those cases, MCP is a best choice. How this MCP is different from HTTP or REST protocol. HTTP will not provide tool discovery mechanism, whereas in MCP we have tool discovery. That is, your MCP client can invoke the server to find out what are the tools available. Then it can decide on which tool to call to complete its task. MCP also has schema generation. HTTP requires custom adapter per LLM, whereas in MCP, one server works with all MCP compatible LLMs. In HTTP request, we use WebSocket or SSE protocol, whereas in MCP, we use streamable transport. We will look at the example which explains these things. Also, HTTP or REST is stateless, but MCP maintains state.